view, but if we back up far enough to see it whole, I think it can be seen to divide, roughly speaking, into three main epochs or periods, so far as the prominence or even presence of the question of life's meaning as a subject of instruction is concerned. In the first period, which begins with the founding of Harvard in 1636 and lasts until roughly the Civil War, the question not only had a place in higher education, it was the organizing center of the whole of higher education itself. This first period might be called the Age of Piety. In it, hundreds and hundreds of colleges were founded, including this one, nearly all of them by religious institutions or with a religious affiliation. And their common mission, very broadly understood, was to produce Christian gentlemen, that is to say, young men of a certain character and disposition, with beliefs of a certain kind, with a world view, a moral and a spiritual and intellectual world view that had been developed through a careful study of a prescribed course of classical texts, and by classical texts I mean mainly Greek and Latin texts, interspersed and connected with very deliberate didactic moral instruction of the thou shalt and thou shalt not variety. The teachers who taught in these colleges did not think of themselves as providing their students with information or teaching them methods of study which they could employ in later life to one end or another. They thought of themselves as the custodians of their students' souls. It was they were shepherds. They were the spiritual shepherds of their students, and it was their responsibility to ask with them this fundamental question, what is life's meaning, and then to tell them what the one right answer to it is. That the question must be asked, it was so obvious that it must, that it would not even have occurred to the faculty of Dartmouth College in its early years to put it that way. It was just an obvious fact of college life. And that there is a single, unambiguous, clear, demonstrable answer anchored in the truths of the world and in God's truths. That was as clear to them as the centrality and importance of the question itself. The second period, or epoch, in American higher education begins in the second half of the 19th century, in the decades following the Civil War, and it lasts, roughly speaking, until the middle years of the 20th century. The decisive event that defines and shapes this period is the emergence in this country of the modern university system. The university, as we are familiar with it today and have been for nearly a century and a half, is, to begin with, a German import brought to these shores initially by a group of devoted American scholars in the middle years of the 19th century who had gone to Germany to pursue advanced study in one field or another, and brought back with them the idea of the university system, which had already taken firm root in that country. What is a university in the German and then subsequently American view of it? A university is a gathering of scholars, of researchers, who see their principal mission as being the regular production of new knowledge, of new information, new discoveries, of new theories, and of a new and better understanding of the world and of human beings. The responsibility of faculty, of the research scholars who are gathered in such a university, the primary orienting responsibility of the faculty is not to care for their students' souls, for their moral and spiritual well-being, as had been the case in the first epoch, in the age of piety, but to do their part in a very elaborate division of intellectual labor to add to the progressive accumulation of discovery, invention, and understanding in the field or discipline to which they happened to belong. Work in one's discipline was guided by what in my book I call the modern research ideal, which has essentially two commandments. One is, thou shalt specialize, and the second is, thou must approach thy work in a spirit of impersonality. And let me just say a very brief word about each of these. To be a responsible participant in the work of one's home discipline, whatever that discipline might be, whether it's political science or biology or art history or the study of English literature, to be a responsible participant in that endeavor, you must limit your efforts to a very narrowly defined plot of ground, because if you permit yourself to range more widely than that, you'll be distracted, your energies will be dissipated, you won't do anything rigorous and professional and of responsible, lasting value. You must also approach your work in a spirit of impersonality. See yourself as an instrument or tool of the discipline. The point of work is not to aggrandize yourself, to develop, cultivate your own sensibilities for the pleasure of their exercise and possession. You are there to advance the discipline, and to the extent you possibly can, of course this is humanly very difficult, you ought to subordinate or subjugate your own personal interests for the sake of the impersonal ideal of a multi-generational project of ever accumulating knowledge and discovery in the field in which you're working. So specialization and impersonality become the watchwords in the new university system, which takes root in this country, as I say, in the decades following the Civil War, and of course is with us still and flourishing, though for reasons that I'll explain, I close my second epoch in the middle years of the 20th century. Now, from the point of view of what I've called the modern research ideal with the twin mandates of specialization and impersonality, the old question of life's meaning, which had been at the center of things in the age of piety, begins to look like a dilettante's question. It's not a question which can be made easily amenable to study or research according to the dictates of specialization and impersonality. And the reason why that's true, I think, is pretty self-evident. The question of life's meaning is just too sprawling and messy. It's too untidy. It's too large to be made the subject of specialized attention in the way the research ideal demands. And it's too exquisitely personal. For each one of us, it's my question in a very painfully personal way. It cannot be approached in the spirit of impersonality without losing its soul. So either you stick with the question, in which case you've got to be faithless to the commands of the research ideal, or you submit to those demands and give up on the question and put it aside as a